Americans have the 8th highest average income in the world, but rank 22nd in wealth per adult. How is that possible? The answer lies in 7 wealth-building strategies that other countries have mastered while most Americans remain completely unaware they exist. Imagine knowing exactly how Japanese families maintain businesses for 47 generations, or how Singapore turned strategic education into a wealth-building powerhouse. In the next 15 minutes, I'm breaking down wealth secrets from 7 countries that could completely change how you build financial security, regardless of your current income or savings. The American wealth paradox: high income, lower wealth. It's a financial puzzle that doesn't make sense at first glance. Americans earn some of the highest incomes in the world, ranking 8th globally in average income. But when it comes to actual wealth accumulation, we plummet to 22nd place. That's right. Despite bringing home bigger paychecks than citizens of most developed nations, Americans are falling behind in the wealth-building race. So what gives? This wealth paradox represents one of the biggest financial disconnects in the modern world. Americans work longer hours, earn more, yet somehow end up with less to show for it. It's like running on a financial treadmill. Lots of effort, minimal progress. Let's break down the numbers. The average American household earns about $69,000 annually, putting us near the top globally for income. Yet our median wealth per adult sits at just $79,274, less than half of what adults in countries like Australia, Belgium, and Canada have managed to accumulate. Even more shocking? Switzerland's median wealth per adult is over $146,000, and they work fewer hours than Americans do. But wait, you might be thinking, I follow all the classic American financial advice. Max out my 401k, invest in the S&P 500, and try to buy real estate when I can. What am I missing? And there's our first clue to solving this paradox. American financial advice has become an echo chamber of the same 3 strategies: workplace retirement accounts, stock market investing, primarily in U.S. companies, and real estate. While these aren't bad approaches, they represent a remarkably narrow view of wealth building compared to global standards. The American wealth building approach has another major flaw: our obsession with short-term gains. We've created an investment culture that celebrates quarterly returns over decade-long growth. Just look at the average holding period for stocks. Americans typically keep their investments for less than a year before selling and moving on to the next hot tip. Compare that to investors in Germany, who hold stocks for an average of 4 to 5 years, allowing compound interest to work its magic. Our financial blind spots go beyond impatience. There's also what behavioral economists call home country bias, the tendency to invest primarily in familiar domestic options rather than looking globally. While Americans keep roughly 85% of their investments in US-based assets, investors in countries like Singapore and Switzerland typically maintain portfolios split more evenly between domestic and international investments. Then there's the elephant in the room: American consumer culture. We earn more but save substantially less than citizens of countries with similar incomes. The average American household saves just 5 to 7% of their income, while households in countries like China and Singapore routinely save 30% or more. And it's not just about discipline. It's baked into our national identity. From childhood, we're bombarded with messaging that equates spending with happiness and success. This consumption habit leads directly to another wealth killer: debt. Americans carry an average of $90,460 in personal debt, including mortgages, student loans, credit cards, and auto loans. The interest on this debt creates a constant drain on wealth-building potential. By comparison, countries like Germany and Japan maintain household debt-to-income ratios that are significantly lower. But the American wealth paradox isn't just about financial habits. It's also about mindset. Our individualistic culture approaches wealth building as a solo endeavor rather than a family or community project. While families in countries like China and India often pool resources across generations to make larger, more impactful investments, Americans typically manage finances as isolated nuclear families or individuals. There's also a peculiar psychological barrier that prevents many Americans from adopting international wealth strategies: cultural exceptionalism. There's an unspoken belief that American financial methods must be superior simply because they're American. This financial nationalism blinds us to innovative approaches used successfully elsewhere. Our educational system reinforces this narrow perspective. American financial literacy programs, when they exist at all, focus almost exclusively on domestic financial products and strategies. Students learn about 401k, but not about Singapore's CPF system or Switzerland's three-pillar approach to retirement that consistently produces better outcomes. The timing gap presents another challenge. Americans tend to start thinking about serious wealth building in their 30s or 40s, while financial education begins in childhood in countries like Singapore and Japan. By the time many Americans start focusing on wealth accumulation, they're already playing catch-up against decades of potential compound growth. The irony is that America's economic system could actually support faster wealth building than almost any other country. We have access to the world's most sophisticated financial markets, relatively low tax burdens compared to many developed nations, and a legal system that strongly protects private property. The tools for exceptional wealth creation are available. We're just not using them effectively. So what's the solution? It starts with recognizing that wealth building isn't just about earning more money. It's about adopting strategic approaches that transcend cultural boundaries. Americans need to look beyond our borders to discover proven wealth-building methods that could dramatically accelerate our financial progress. Consider this. 7 of the top 10 countries for millionaires per capita aren't using uniquely American wealth strategies. They're implementing distinct approaches based on their cultural and economic strengths. Switzerland has mastered diversification across multiple currencies and asset classes. Japan has perfected the art of multi-generational planning. Singapore has transformed education from an expense into their primary wealth-building vehicle. Each of these countries has developed wealth-building strategies that solve specific problems Americans face. The real question is, why aren't we borrowing their best ideas? That's exactly what we're going to explore in this video. I've researched wealth-building methods from 7 different countries that consistently outperform American approaches in specific areas. These aren't just theoretical concepts. They're practical strategies that have created more millionaires per capita than American methods in many cases. And here's the best part. You don't need to move abroad or open complicated international accounts to benefit from these approaches. Each of these wealth secrets can be adapted to work within the American financial system, often with even better results than in their countries of origin, thanks to our robust markets and legal protections. Over the next few minutes, I'll reveal these 7 international wealth secrets and show you exactly how to implement them regardless of your current financial situation. We'll start with small, accessible strategies anyone can use today, then build toward more sophisticated approaches as your wealth grows. Japan's IE system, the 1,300-year wealth preservation secret. Imagine a business that's been thriving for over 1,300 years. Not a typo, I said years, not days. While most American companies struggle to survive beyond 15 years, Japan has over 3,100 businesses that have operated continuously for more than 200 years. What's their secret? It's a family wealth system that's completely unknown to most Americans, yet responsible for creating the world's oldest continuously operating businesses. Let me introduce you to the IE system, a Japanese concept that translates roughly to household, but encompasses so much more. This isn't just about family. It's a sophisticated wealth preservation approach that has survived wars, natural disasters, economic collapses, and even the atomic bomb. Take Hoshi Ryokan, a traditional Japanese and founded in 718 AD. This isn't just any hotel. It's been operated by the same family for 46 generations. When the current owners make business decisions, they're not thinking about next quarter's profits or even the next 5 years. They're planning for the next century. In America, we're taught to build wealth primarily for our own success and comfort. Maybe we consider setting aside something for our kids. But in Japan, the IE concept flips this thinking completely. The family business isn't owned by individuals. It's more accurate to say the business owns the family. Each generation sees themselves as temporary stewards protecting and growing a legacy that will outlive them. What makes this system truly remarkable is how it prioritizes the clan's longevity over individual desires. When a Japanese family business faces tough economic times, they don't lay off workers to maintain profit margins like many American companies. Instead, they might reduce profits for years, sometimes decades, to maintain their market position and reputation. This long-term thinking creates remarkable stability that survives economic downturns that would destroy most Western businesses. One of the most fascinating aspects of the IE system is its approach to succession planning. In America, only 34% of adults have a will, and fewer than 30% of family businesses survive to the second generation. Japanese families under the IE system create detailed succession plans decades in advance. The current head of the family business begins training their successor when they're young, gradually increasing responsibilities over 20 to 30 years before a formal handover. But here's where it gets really interesting. If the biological children aren't suitable successors, no problem. The Japanese IE system includes a formal adoption mechanism called mukoyoshi that allows businesses to bring in talented non-family members as heirs. This isn't just some honorary title. These adopted heirs become legal family members with full inheritance rights. Some estimates suggest that up to 10% of Japanese adoptions are specifically for business succession purposes. Take the Suzuki family, founders of Suzuki Motor Corporation. When there was no suitable heir in the family, they adopted a talented engineer who eventually took over leadership. This practice creates an unusual kind of meritocracy within family businesses that American companies rarely achieve. Another core element of the IE system is its approach to assets. American wealth building often focuses on maximizing short-term asset values. In contrast, Japanese families under the IE system view their primary business and core properties as symbolic capital that should never be sold, regardless of potential profit. These assets aren't measured by their market value, but by their ability to sustain the family through generations. The IE system also takes a remarkably different approach to growth. While American businesses often chase rapid expansion and market domination, Japanese family businesses focus on sustainable size. They understand that getting too big too quickly creates vulnerability during economic downturns. The goal isn't exponential growth, but steady, manageable expansion that can weather centuries, not just years. One striking example is Tsuin Tea, a tea shop operating continuously since 1160. They've had countless opportunities to expand into a chain or franchise, but have deliberately remained a single location for over 860 years. Why? Because they understand that preserving quality and tradition generates more long-term wealth than rapid expansion that might dilute their brand. Even more remarkable is how Japanese families prepare for disaster. Most American businesses have contingency plans that might look a few years ahead. Under the IE system, Japanese families maintain what they call 100-year disaster plans, detailed instructions for rebuilding after catastrophic events. These plans often include dispersed asset storage, knowledge preservation systems, and specific recovery strategies that can be implemented by future generations. During World War II, when bombing threatened many historic Japanese businesses, these disaster plans proved invaluable. Family treasures and crucial documents were often evacuated to multiple locations, ensuring that even if headquarters were destroyed, the business could continue. This level of preparation is virtually unheard of in American business planning. The financial structure of the IE system also differs dramatically from American wealth models. While Americans often focus on maximizing profit percentages, Japanese family businesses using the IE system prioritize market share and customer relationships over profit margins. They're often willing to accept lower profits, sometimes for decades, to maintain their position and reputation. The Japanese insurance company Tokio Marine and Fire Insurance, founded in 1879, has maintained this approach for generations. During difficult economic periods, they've chosen to reduce profit margins rather than raise premiums on long-term customers. This sometimes frustrates short-term investors, but has created extraordinary customer loyalty that translates into sustainable, multi-generational wealth. How can you actually apply this wealth secret without moving to Japan or dramatically changing your family structure? Start by shifting your wealth timeframe. Instead of focusing on 5-year plans, create a 25-year family wealth vision. Consider creating a family mission statement that outlines values and long-term goals that extend beyond your own lifetime. You can also establish what the Japanese call a knowledge bank, a system for preserving crucial information across generations. This might include detailed documentation of assets, professional connections, and specialized knowledge that would otherwise be lost between generations. In the digital age, This is easier than ever with secure cloud storage and digital family archives. Consider creating a family investment fund where multiple generations contribute and manage assets together. This doesn't need to start large, even a small monthly contribution can introduce younger family members to long-term investment thinking. The key is establishing the structures for multi-generational wealth that can grow over time. You can also adopt the Japanese approach to business by focusing on sustainable growth rather than quick profits. If you own a business, consider how decisions might impact your market position over decades, not just quarters. Look for opportunities to create what the Japanese call regenerative assets. Investments that not only appreciate but actually increase their productivity over generations. What makes the IE system so powerful as a wealth preservation tool is its ability to prioritize market share over profit and resist short-term thinking. When a traditional Japanese company faces pressure to maximize quarterly returns, they often respond by looking at their multi-century history. If a strategy wouldn't have worked during past economic crises, they're unlikely to adopt it now, regardless of potential short-term gains. Singapore's education investment strategy, turning knowledge into national wealth. While Japan builds wealth through centuries-old family businesses, Singapore took a radically different approach that transformed them from third world to first in a single generation. What if your greatest wealth-building asset isn't property or stocks, but something you've been taught to see as an expense? In 1965, Singapore was a struggling island nation with no natural resources, high unemployment, and a GDP per capita of just $516. Fast forward to today. Singapore boasts over 269,000 millionaires among its 5.7 million residents, ranking 5th globally in millionaires per capita. This transformation didn't happen through natural resources or manufacturing prowess. Instead, Singapore bet everything on what they saw as their only viable resource, their people's minds. When Lee Kuan Yew became Singapore's first prime minister, he made a bold declaration that shocked many international observers. He said, "Our only natural resource is our people. If we don't invest in them, we might as well give up." This statement wasn't just political rhetoric. It became the foundation of Singapore's entire economic strategy. While Americans typically view education as a personal expense, something you pay for to get a job, Singaporeans view it as their primary wealth-building vehicle. The government invests approximately 20% of its annual budget in education, compared to the United States' 6%. But it's not just about spending more, it's about spending strategically. Singapore's education system is designed specifically to create wealth-generating citizens through 3 key approaches. First, they focus on financial literacy from elementary school. By age 10, Singaporean students are already learning the basics of compound interest, debt management, and investment principles. These aren't elective courses. They're integrated into the core curriculum alongside math and science. Second, Singapore's education system emphasizes entrepreneurial thinking. In secondary schools, students participate in mandatory Enterprise Challenge programs where they create actual businesses with seed funding provided by the government. The best projects receive additional investment and mentorship. Compare this to American schools, where entrepreneurship is typically relegated to optional after-school clubs or specialized magnet programs. Third, Singapore constantly realigns its education system with emerging economic opportunities. When the government identifies high-growth sectors like biotechnology, artificial intelligence, or financial technology, they immediately create specialized educational tracks and scholarships focused on these areas. This ensures Singaporeans are trained for tomorrow's high-paying jobs, not yesterday's. The results speak for themselves. According to the World Economic Forum, Singapore ranks first globally in preparing students for future high-growth industries. Their graduates command some of the highest starting salaries in the world, with the average Singaporean technology graduate earning 38% more than their American counterparts when adjusted for cost of living. Beyond the classroom, Singapore has created unique financial vehicles that encourage educational investment. The EduSave program automatically deposits government funds into specialized accounts for every student, which can only be used for supplementary education expenses. Parents can also contribute tax-free to these accounts, creating a powerful incentive to fund educational enrichment. Even more impressive is Singapore's Skills Future initiative, which provides every citizen over 25 years old with $500, recently increased to $1,000 during the pandemic, to spend on approved continuing education courses. This credit never expires and is periodically topped up by the government. The message is clear. Your education doesn't end with formal schooling. It's a lifelong wealth building. Strategy. Singapore's approach has created an intriguing cultural shift. While American families often save for their children's college education as a financial burden they hope to reduce, Singaporean families view educational investment as their primary wealth transfer mechanism. Many families maintain dedicated knowledge accounts, separate from college savings, specifically earmarked for educational enrichment opportunities. One Singaporean family I interviewed explained their philosophy. In America, parents leave their children houses or trust funds. In Singapore, we invest in our children's capabilities. A house can burn down, a business can fail, but knowledge appreciates and cannot be taken away. This mindset extends to how Singaporeans view career development. In a recent survey, 68% of Singaporean professionals reported spending at least 5% of their annual income on additional training and education, compared to just 14% of American professionals. They don't see this as an expense, but as their highest return investment. The wealth-building power of this approach becomes evident in the data. Despite having a lower average income than Americans, Singaporeans accumulate wealth at a significantly faster rate. By age 40, the average Singaporean has 1.8 times more net worth relative to their income than their American counterpart. Their education-first strategy generates higher earning potential, better job security, and more entrepreneurial opportunities. Perhaps most fascinating is how Singapore's education strategy creates multi-generational wealth. Unlike physical assets that depreciate or require maintenance, knowledge compounds and transfers freely between generations. Singaporean grandparents routinely fund specialized educational experiences for their grandchildren, creating what economists call knowledge cascades that accelerate wealth building across generations. This doesn't mean Singapore's approach is without challenges. Their education system has been criticized for its intensity and pressure on students. However, recent reforms have aimed to balance academic excellence with well-being, introducing more project-based learning and creative problem-solving. So how can you apply Singapore's education investment principles to your own financial strategy? First, reconsider how you categorize education spending in your budget. Instead of viewing it as a consumption expense, treat it as your highest potential investment category with its own dedicated allocation, separate from retirement or emergency savings. Second, focus on acquiring specific future-oriented skills rather than general credentials. Singapore's education system is ruthlessly practical, prioritizing skills in artificial intelligence, data science, and other high-growth fields. Americans often pursue degrees without clear market value, but the Singaporean approach suggests targeting your learning to specific economic opportunities. Third, create your own version of Singapore's continuous learning accounts. Consider establishing a dedicated skills account where you deposit a fixed percentage of your income solely for future education. This isn't for formal degrees, but for targeted courses and certifications that increase your earning potential. Finally, make knowledge transfer a deliberate family wealth strategy. Instead of just saving for your children's college, consider creating dedicated funds for specialized educational experiences. Programming camps, international exchanges, Germany's wealth preservation mastery, building fortunes through patience. While Singapore races toward the future through education, Germany takes an entirely different path to wealth. One that might seem downright boring until you see the results. Forget flashy investment strategies and overnight success stories. Germans have built one of Europe's strongest economies by embracing what Americans often consider the least exciting approach to wealth: patience, preservation, and long-term thinking. The average German millionaire probably wouldn't catch your attention at the airport. Unlike their American counterparts, they're more likely to be flying economy class, driving a practical, albeit high-quality car, and living in a comfortable but modest home. This isn't because they can't afford luxury. It's because their entire philosophy of wealth operates on different principles. German wealth building starts with an almost religious devotion to saving. While financial influencers in America often push investment strategies before building adequate savings, Germans typically save between 10 to 15% of their income. more than double the American average. This creates a solid foundation that makes their investment approach possible in the first place. When Germans do invest, they prioritize what they call Substanzwert, or substance investments, assets with intrinsic value that maintain worth regardless of market fluctuations. This means quality real estate in stable locations, established businesses with steady cash flow, and investments in productive capacity rather than speculative assets. Perhaps most fascinating is how Germany's middle class has built significant wealth through their Mittelstand companies. These family-owned, mid-sized businesses form the backbone of Germany's economy, making up 99% of German companies and employing over 60% of the workforce. Unlike American businesses that often chase rapid growth and quick exits, Mittelstand firms focus on becoming the best in specific, often narrow market niches. Take Winterhalter Gastronom, for example. Most Americans have never heard of this family-owned business, yet they're the world's leading specialist in commercial dishwashing systems for restaurants and hotels. By focusing exclusively on this niche for decades, they've built a global business that dominates its market. The company has remained family-owned since 1947, passing through generations with a consistent focus on quality and specialization rather than diversification. This specialized approach creates remarkable stability. During the 2008 financial crisis, when American unemployment spiked to 10%, German unemployment barely budged. The Mittelstand's focus on sustainable growth rather than quarterly profits meant they could weather the storm without mass layoffs. German investors also demonstrate remarkable patience with their investments. Beyond just holding stocks longer, they approach asset ownership with a completely different mindset. The German concept of Vermögensbildung, wealth formation, views investments not as speculative bets, but as productive assets to be held for generations. This patience pays extraordinary dividends over time. A study by the German Stock Institute found that investors who held diversified German equities for 20-plus years never experienced a loss, even during periods containing world wars and hyperinflation. This long-term holding strategy maximizes the power of compounding while minimizing the transaction costs and taxes that eat away at American portfolios. Germans also utilize financial vehicles that Americans rarely consider. One example is the Familienstiftung, or Family Foundation. Unlike American foundations that focus primarily on charitable giving, German family foundations serve as vehicles to preserve wealth across generations while reducing estate taxes. These foundations can own businesses, real estate, and investment portfolios with clear governance structures that prevent family disputes from destroying accumulated wealth. The German approach to financial education also stands in stark contrast to American practices. While American financial education, when it exists at all, often focuses on credit scores and basic budgeting, German schools teach Wirtschaftskompetenz, or economic competence. Students learn not just how to manage money, but how to evaluate the quality of investments, recognize unsustainable business models, and understand economic cycles. This education carries through to adulthood. German banks typically provide clients with extensive financial literacy materials rather than pushing products. One major German bank requires investment advisors to present clients with comprehensive risk assessments for any recommended investment, including detailed scenarios of potential losses in various market conditions. This creates informed investors rather than reactionary ones. Even Germany's housing market reflects their patient approach to wealth building. While Americans often view homes as appreciating assets to be flipped or upgraded, Germany has one of the lowest homeownership rates in Europe at around 50%. This isn't because Germans can't afford homes, it's because they approach housing differently. Many Germans rent for decades while investing the difference in other assets, only purchasing homes when they can do so with minimal debt and a clear long-term plan. When Germans do buy property, they typically do so with 20 to 30% down payments and fixed-rate mortgages that often last 15 years rather than 30. This conservative approach means they build equity faster and are less vulnerable to market fluctuations. Property is viewed as a multi-generational asset rather than a stepping stone. German wealth planning also extends beyond financial assets to include what they call human capital, or human capital. Families consciously develop skills and capabilities across generations, with parents and grandparents funding specialized education, apprenticeships, and professional development that align with family businesses or investment interests. The Schaeffler family exemplifies this approach. Their global industrial manufacturing company, with over 84,000 employees and 14 billion euros in annual revenue, remains predominantly family-owned after 4 generations. Each family member receives specialized education not just in engineering and business, but in governance and wealth management to prepare them for stewardship roles. Another distinctive aspect of German wealth preservation is their approach to business succession. Unlike American entrepreneurs who often build companies with the goal of selling them, German business owners typically plan successions decades in advance. The average Mittelstand succession process begins 7 to 10 years before the actual transition of power. This methodical approach extends to personal finance as well. Germans typically create detailed financial plans spanning 30-plus years, reviewed and adjusted annually rather than in response to market movements. This prevents the panic selling and emotional decision-making that plague many American investors during volatility. The results of this patient approach speak for themselves. Germany boasts one of the lowest wealth inequality rates among developed nations, with the top 1% owning about 18% of wealth compared to nearly 40% in the United States. The median German household has approximately 60,400 euros in net financial assets, modest by some standards, but remarkably consistent across the population. How can you apply the German wealth preservation approach regardless of your current financial situation? First, adopt the first generation saves, second generation maintains, third generation builds mindset. Even small, consistent investments with a 20-plus year time horizon can grow substantially through compounding. Second, focus on quality over quantity in your investments. Rather than chasing trends or attempting to time markets, identify assets with intrinsic value that will maintain worth regardless of economic conditions. This might mean paying slightly more for a better located property or investing in businesses with sustainable competitive advantages rather than growth potential alone. Third, create concrete succession plans for your assets. Even if you're just starting your wealth journey, documenting your investment philosophy and sharing it with family members can establish patterns that preserve wealth across generations. The wealthiest German families maintain written charters that establish not just how assets should be managed, but the values that should guide financial decisions. Finally, resist the cultural pressure for conspicuous consumption. The German concept of stealth wealth means directing resources toward assets that appreciate rather than depreciate. This doesn't mean living in deprivation. Quality is valued highly, but rather making thoughtful choices about where money flows. India's micro-investing revolution, building wealth rupee by rupee. While Germans build wealth through patience and preservation, across the globe, another financial revolution is brewing. One where the entry barrier isn't years of discipline, but mere pennies. What if I told you that millions of Indians are building substantial wealth starting with investments smaller than what Americans spend on their morning coffee? In a country where nearly 24% of people live on less than $2 a day, India has pioneered a wealth-building approach that seems impossible to most Americans: the micro-investing revolution. This movement has transformed how ordinary citizens access financial markets, proving that wealth creation doesn't require substantial capital to begin. The average American believes they need at least $1,000 to start investing meaningfully. According to a recent survey by Bankrate, 56% of Americans who don't invest cite not having enough money as their primary reason. Meanwhile, in India, platforms like Decimal allow users to start with as little as 10 rupees, about 12 cents. This radical accessibility has created an investment boom among India's growing middle class. Take Priya Sharma from Pune, who began investing just 50 rupees, about 60 cents, daily through a micro-investing app while working as a college cafeteria cook. 3 years later, her portfolio has grown to over 80,000 rupees, $960, enough to help fund her daughter's education. This isn't an isolated success story, but part of a nationwide trend toward financial inclusion through micro-investments. What makes India's approach revolutionary isn't just the low entry point, it's the psychological shift. While American financial advice often emphasizes go big or go home, Indian platforms focus on consistency over amount. The mantra pays Jod Kar, penny by penny, has become the rallying cry for a generation of new investors. Apps like Jar and Kaipot have gamified the saving process, automatically rounding up everyday purchases and investing the difference. When Rajesh buys a chai for 18 rupees, these apps round up to 20 rupees and invest the 2 rupee difference. This painless approach has attracted over 50 million new users to investment platforms in just the last 3 years. The revolution extends beyond technology. Community-based investing models have flourished through modern versions of traditional chit funds called investment kitties. These groups of 10 to 20 people, often friends or colleagues, pool small monthly contributions of 500, 1000 rupees each, about $6 to $12, to make larger collective investments that would be out of reach individually. A group of vegetable vendors in Mumbai pooled 1,000 rupees monthly, $12, for 2 years, building a sizable investment fund that allowed them to purchase shares in blue-chip companies and even a small commercial property. The community aspect adds accountability while democratizing wealth-building opportunities that would be inaccessible to individuals. What's particularly interesting is how this micro-investing culture has penetrated rural areas, where traditional banking services have historically been limited. The combination of widespread smartphone adoption and simplified KYC, Know Your Customer, processes has brought investing capabilities to villages where people previously kept savings under mattresses or in gold jewelry. The data tells a compelling story. According to the Securities and Exchange Board of India, the country added over 36 million new retail investor accounts between 2020 and 2022. For context, that's more than the entire population of Texas jumping into the investment world in just 2 years. Even more impressive, 91% of these new investors started with amounts under 5,000 rupees, $60. The rapid adoption has been fueled by India's homegrown investment platforms that speak the language of everyday people. While American platforms often use intimidating financial jargon, Indian apps explain investing concepts using relatable analogies from cricket, India's most popular sport, or Bollywood movies. Zerodha, India's largest retail broker, explains diversification as not putting all your panipuri in one plate. These culturally relevant explanations have helped break down the mystique around investing that keeps many Americans on the sidelines. Another powerful aspect of India's micro-investing revolution is the concept of SIP, or systematic investment plans. Rather than trying to time the market or make large one-time investments, SIPs allow investors to automatically contribute tiny amounts at regular intervals. The average SIP contribution is just 2,500 rupees monthly, about $30. But India now processes over 60 million such transactions every month. This approach has been particularly effective for India's massive gig economy workers with irregular income streams. Auto rickshaw drivers, domestic helpers, and food delivery workers can invest based on their daily earnings, rather than committing to fixed monthly amounts they might not always have. Rakesh Kumar, a delivery rider for Zomato, India's DoorDash equivalent, invests 10% of each day's earnings through a micro-investment app. Some days I put in 100 rupees, other days just 20, but it's always something, he explains. In 2 years, his portfolio has grown to 55,000 rupees, $660, an amount that would have seemed impossible to accumulate through traditional saving methods. The gender impact of this revolution is equally significant. Historically, financial decisions in many Indian households were male-dominated. Micro-investing has changed this dynamic, with women now making up nearly 40% of new investors. Platforms like LXME specifically target women with educational content and investment options starting at just 100 rupees. This shift is creating first-generation investors at an unprecedented rate. According to a report by the National Stock Exchange of India, 75% of new investors come from families with no previous market participation. This contrasts sharply with America, where financial literacy and investing habits tend to be passed down generationally, creating persistent wealth gaps. The Indian government has supported this democratization of investing through initiatives like the Jan Dhan Yojana program, which has helped over 430 million previously unbanked individuals open their first bank accounts, creating the foundation for further financial inclusion. These accounts can be linked directly to investment apps, removing friction from the process. What lessons can Americans learn from India's micro-investing revolution? First, the power of starting small but consistent. The Indian approach proves that regular micro-contributions can compound into meaningful wealth over time. Second, the importance of accessibility. When financial platforms remove barriers and simplify concepts, participation explodes. Perhaps most importantly, India demonstrates that community-based approaches to wealth building can be more effective than purely individualistic models. By pooling resources and knowledge, groups of modest means can access opportunities typically reserved for the wealthy. American fintech companies are beginning to take notice. Apps like Acorns and Stash have adopted some principles from India's micro-investing playbook, but they haven't achieved the same level of cultural shift or mass adoption. The psychological barrier, that investing requires significant capital, remains stronger in America than in India. For Americans struggling with inflation and stagnant wages, India's example offers a powerful alternative to the all-or-nothing investing mindset. Starting with just a few dollars a week, the equivalent of a single coffee or streaming subscription, could build meaningful wealth over time when approached with the consistency and community support seen in India. Norway's social infrastructure approach, building wealth through collective investment. After traveling through India's penny-by-penny approach to wealth building, I want to take you somewhere completely different. A place where citizens aren't obsessed with their investment accounts or portfolio growth, yet somehow enjoy some of the highest personal wealth levels globally. Welcome to Norway, where the entire concept of wealth building gets flipped on its head. Norway ranks among the top countries globally for millionaires per capita, with roughly 1 in 20 adults having a net worth exceeding $1 million. But here's the mind-blowing part. Most Norwegians aren't individual investing gurus. They don't spend hours researching stocks, managing real estate empires, or hustling side gigs. So how exactly are they building this wealth? The secret lies in what I call collective wealth infrastructure. A completely different approach to building prosperity that focuses on shared resources rather than individual portfolios. And at the center of this system stands one of the most impressive financial entities on the planet, Norway's government pension fund Global. This massive sovereign wealth fund, currently valued at over $1.7 trillion, that's trillion with a T, holds approximately 1.5% of all global stocks and shares. Created in 1990 to invest the country's oil revenues, this fund has grown to become the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. But here's the brilliant part. Instead of spending this money immediately, Norway invests it for future generations, effectively making every Norwegian citizen a participant in global markets. Each Norwegian indirectly owns about $310,000 in fund assets, and that's just their share of the National Wealth Fund, not counting their personal savings or home equity. The fund generates returns of around 6% annually, creating a perpetual engine for national prosperity that will continue long after the oil wells run dry. But Norway's approach to wealth building goes far beyond just this impressive fund. The entire social infrastructure is designed to eliminate the major expenses that drain American savings and create financial anxiety. Take healthcare, for example. While medical expenses remain the leading cause of bankruptcy in America, Norwegians enjoy universal healthcare coverage funded through their tax system. A Norwegian never has to choose between seeking medical care and keeping their savings intact. They never face the horrible choice of financial ruin or declining treatment. The peace of mind this provides is difficult for most Americans to even imagine. The same applies to higher education. Norwegian universities are tuition-free, even for international students. Compare that to the average American college graduate who enters the workforce with nearly $30,000 in student loan debt. Norwegians start their careers debt-free and can immediately begin building wealth rather than paying down loans. When it comes to retirement, Norway's pension system ensures that citizens can retire with dignity. The basic government pension replaces about 45% of pre-retirement income for the average worker, supplemented by employer pensions and, of course, that massive sovereign wealth fund working in the background. This comprehensive retirement system means Norwegians don't need to obsessively save and invest individually for retirement. The collective system handles much of this need. This approach creates a fascinating mindset shift. Without the constant threat of financial catastrophe from medical bills, education costs, or insufficient retirement savings, Norwegians can focus their financial energy differently. While many Americans build emergency funds to cover potential disasters, Norwegians can direct that same capital toward building businesses, pursuing further education, or simply enjoying a higher quality of life. Lars Meyer, a Norwegian financial advisor, explains this philosophy. In Norway, we don't see wealth building as primarily an individual responsibility. We believe that certain basic needs, healthcare, education, retirement security, are better handled collectively. This frees individuals to focus on creating value rather than just protecting against downside risks. This collective approach to risk management extends to family leave policies as well. Norwegian parents receive 49 weeks of parental leave at full pay or 59 weeks at 80% pay. This means having children doesn't create the same financial strain it often does for American families. New parents don't need to deplete savings or take on debt during this critical family time. What's particularly notable is how this system affects wealth distribution. Norway consistently ranks among the countries with the lowest wealth inequality. The Gini coefficient, a measure of wealth distribution where 0 represents perfect equality and 1 represents maximum inequality, for Norway hovers around 0.25 compared to 0.41 for the United States. This means prosperity is broadly shared rather than concentrated among the top earners. But let's address the elephant in the room, taxes. Yes, Norwegians pay higher taxes than Americans, with tax rates ranging from 22% to 40% depending on income. However, when you factor in what Americans pay for healthcare premiums, college savings, and retirement contributions, expenses largely covered by the Norwegian system, the effective difference shrinks considerably. Norwegian entrepreneur Sven Jorgensen puts it this way: Americans pay lower taxes, but then have to individually fund services we receive collectively. When you add up what the average American spends on healthcare, education savings, and retirement planning, plus the mental cost of financial worry, our system starts looking quite efficient. This brings us to perhaps the most valuable aspect of Norway's wealth-building approach: peace of mind. Studies consistently show that Norwegians report lower financial stress and anxiety than Americans. When surveyed about financial worries, only 13% of Norwegians reported feeling frequently stressed about money matters, compared to nearly 60% of Americans. This reduced financial stress creates a virtuous cycle. Lower stress leads to better health outcomes, higher productivity, and more mental bandwidth for creative pursuits and entrepreneurship. In fact, despite its strong social safety net, or perhaps because of it, Norway ranks 9th globally on the Global Entrepreneurship Index, ahead of many countries with more individualistic economic systems. Christina Berg, who runs a tech startup in Oslo, explains, "Because I don't worry about healthcare or retirement, I could take the risk of starting my own company. If it failed, I wouldn't be destitute." This security actually encourages entrepreneurship rather than discouraging it. So how can Americans apply Norway's wealth-building principles without moving abroad or completely overhauling our economic system? Here are some practical applications. First, look for opportunities to participate in collective risk-sharing arrangements. This might mean joining a healthcare sharing ministry, participating in cooperative housing, or forming an investment club with friends or family members. Second, prioritize investments in your own social infrastructure, relationships, communities, and networks that can provide mutual support during challenging times. Research shows that strong social connections correlate strongly with financial resilience. Third, consider the true value of security and peace of mind when making financial decisions. Sometimes paying more for comprehensive insurance coverage or building a larger emergency fund can create the mental space needed to take calculated risks in other areas. Fourth, advocate for policies that reduce the individual financial burden of basic needs like healthcare, education, and retirement security. These aren't just social issues, they're directly related to wealth-building capacity. Finally, consider allocating a portion of your investments to funds that focus on infrastructure, renewable energy, and other sectors that build collective prosperity. Many ESG, environmental, social, and governance, funds align with this approach. The Norwegian model teaches us that sometimes the best way to build individual wealth is to invest collectively. By sharing certain risks and costs across society, China's long-term planning security and foundation strategic wealth truly thrive financially. While Norway's approach to collective wealth shows us one path, China reveals what happens when an entire culture embraces the ultimate financial superpower, patience. In a world where most American investors obsess over quarterly reports and daily stock prices, China has been quietly creating millionaires at a staggering pace by playing an entirely different game. Did you know China creates a new billionaire every 5 days? And they've added over 4.4 million millionaires in just the last decade alone. This explosive wealth creation didn't happen by accident or luck. It's the result of a fundamentally different perspective on time and planning that most Americans would find genuinely uncomfortable. When Jack Ma founded Alibaba in 1999, he wasn't thinking about the next quarter or even the next year. He famously told his team, "We don't care about revenues for the first 3 years. We care about building the right product for customers." This 100-year mindset has become the secret weapon of China's wealthiest entrepreneurs and investors. The difference begins with how Chinese businesses and families approach planning. While American companies typically focus on quarterly results to please shareholders, Chinese organizations commonly operate with detailed 5-year plans and broader 20-year strategic visions. This isn't just for major corporations. Even small family businesses in China typically maintain a decade-long outlook. This extended time horizon fundamentally changes investment decisions. Take real estate, for example. Chinese families often purchase properties they won't actually use for 10 to 15 years. Apartments for children who are still in elementary school but will eventually need them for college or marriage. This advanced planning allows them to buy in developing areas before prices skyrocket, creating substantial wealth through appreciation. One particularly powerful wealth-building strategy in China is the family investment pool. Unlike the typical American approach where each nuclear family manages their own finances, Chinese families often combine resources across 3 generations. Grandparents, parents, and even adult children contribute to shared investments that none could afford individually. Li Wei, a 34-year-old Beijing resident, explained this approach. "My parents, my wife's parents, my sister's family, and we all pooled our money to purchase commercial property that now generates income for all of us. No single family could have done this alone." This collective approach regularly enables ordinary Chinese families to make investments that would be out of reach for most American households. The multi-generational investment pool isn't just about larger capital, it's about longer timelines. When investments include both 75-year-old grandparents and 25-year-old grandchildren, the family naturally thinks in terms of decades, not years. This extended perspective leads to substantially different decisions about risk, growth, and asset allocation. China's remarkable wealth generation also stems from their strategic sector focus. Rather than investing broadly across established industries, Chinese investors and government planners identify future growth sectors decades in advance. This isn't random guesswork, it's calculated positioning based on global trends, demographic shifts, and technological trajectories. Look at electric vehicles. While American manufacturers were still perfecting gas engines, China began systematically building the world's largest EV ecosystem. Not just cars, but batteries, charging infrastructure, and materials supply chains. Today, they dominate the global market. By 2022, China accounted for over 60% of global electric vehicle sales. This same forward-looking approach has been applied to renewable energy, advanced manufacturing, and artificial intelligence. Wang Jianlin, founder of Dalian Wanda Group and once China's richest man, advised, "Don't chase today's hot industries. Look for where the world will be in 20 years and position yourself there now." This patient positioning allows Chinese investors to enter emerging sectors before they become crowded and expensive. The Chinese education strategy reinforces this long-term approach. While American parents often focus on getting children into prestigious universities, Chinese families typically map out entire educational trajectories aligned with specific future industries. Children aren't just groomed for good grades. They're guided toward fields projected to experience explosive growth decades later. Zhang Min, a Shanghai mother of 2, exemplifies this strategy. "We decided when my son was 5 that quantum computing would be a dominant field by the time he entered the workforce. We've shaped his entire education around mathematics and physics to position him for this future." This deliberate human capital development creates a workforce precisely aligned with future economic opportunities. One of the most striking contrasts between American and Chinese wealth-building approaches is their different attitudes toward market timing. American investors often try to buy low, sell high, by predicting short-term market movements, a notoriously difficult strategy that research shows consistently underperforms. Chinese investors instead focus on entry position and holding duration. Rather than trying to time market peaks and valleys, they emphasize getting into promising assets and sectors early, then holding through multiple market cycles. This patient approach allows compounding to work its magic without the erosion caused by frequent trading and timing mistakes. A fascinating example of this patience comes from Tencent Holdings, the Chinese tech giant. Early investors who purchased shares during its 2004 IPO and simply held on have seen their investment grow by over 50,000%. Many American investors would have sold after doubling or tripling their money, missing the astronomical long-term gains that patience delivered. Yu Hang, a Chinese investment advisor, explained, "Americans often ask, when should I sell? While Chinese investors ask, how long can I hold?" This fundamental difference in perspective creates vastly different wealth outcomes over decades. This holding mentality extends to all asset classes, stocks, real estate, business interests, and even collectibles. The patience-driven approach carries through to China's distinctive savings and consumption patterns. While American culture celebrates immediate gratification and luxury consumption, Chinese households typically save between 25 to 50% of their income. This high savings rate doesn't just provide capital for investment. It creates financial resilience that allows families to weather downturns without liquidating assets at market bottoms. So how can you adopt China's long-term approach without moving to Beijing? First, shift your investment horizon. Instead of asking, what will this stock do next quarter? Ask, will this company be larger and more profitable in 10 years? This simple reframing leads to dramatically different investment decisions. Second, create your own 5-year and 20-year plans. Most Americans have vague financial goals, but lack the detailed roadmaps that Chinese families routinely maintain. Document exactly where you want to be financially in 5, 10, and 20 years, then work backward to create concrete action steps. Third, consider forming your own family investment pool. Even starting small with siblings or parents can increase your collective purchasing power and encourage longer thinking. This doesn't mean sacrificing independence. It means strategically combining resources for specific opportunities that benefit everyone. Fourth, position yourself in future-focused sectors rather than chasing today's hot investments. Ask what industries will be essential in 2040, not just 2024. Technologies like quantum computing, biotechnology, advanced materials, and clean energy offer potential decades-long growth runways that short-term investors often overlook. Finally, shift from timing markets to time in markets. Research consistently shows that investment returns correlate more strongly with holding duration than with entry timing. Your biggest wealth-building advantage isn't predicting next month's market move. It's your ability to remain invested for decades while others bounce in and out. Implementing even a portion of China's patience-driven approach can dramatically improve your financial trajectory. While short-term investors are constantly stressed about market fluctuations, patient investors can relax, knowing that time is working in their favor. Switzerland's diversification mastery, protecting wealth through any crisis. Patient investing builds wealth, but what good is a 30-year strategy if a market crash wipes you out halfway through? This is where Switzerland enters our global wealth tour with a masterclass in financial survival. In a world where Americans routinely lose 30 to 50% during economic downturns, Swiss investors have developed an all-weather approach that protects assets through wars, depressions, and financial meltdowns while still growing wealth over time. What makes the Swiss approach so unique isn't just that they diversify, it's how they diversify. While American financial advisors might suggest splitting your money between U.S. stocks and bonds, Swiss wealth managers operate on an entirely different level of sophistication. They construct portfolios specifically designed to withstand multiple economic scenarios simultaneously. The Swiss approach to wealth preservation has been shaped by centuries of geopolitical uncertainty. Being surrounded by larger nations that were often at war, Switzerland developed financial strategies that could weather any storm. This historical context explains why even today, Swiss investors maintain what they call pentagonal diversification, spreading assets across 5 distinct dimensions: asset classes, geographical regions, currencies, economic scenarios, and time horizons. Take the example of Mark Bernhard, a third-generation wealth manager from Zurich. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, his clients experienced average portfolio declines of just 7 to 12%, while typical American investors saw their retirement accounts plummet by 30 to 40%. His secret wasn't market timing or brilliant stock picks. It was systematic diversification across assets that respond differently to the same economic events. Americans think diversification means owning different U.S. stocks or adding some bonds, Bernhard explains. We Swiss think of diversification as creating a portfolio that can survive anything from hyperinflation to deflation, currency collapse to political revolution. We don't try to predict which crisis comes next. We prepare for all of them simultaneously. This approach means Swiss portfolios typically contain substantial allocations to physical gold, silver, and other precious metals, not as speculative investments but as insurance policies against currency devaluation. While Americans might allocate 1 to 2% to gold, if any, Swiss investors commonly maintain 10 to 15% in precious metals and other hard assets. But what's truly fascinating is how Swiss investors view currency diversification. Most Americans hold virtually all their assets in US dollars, creating enormous currency risk that they rarely acknowledge. Meanwhile, Swiss investors routinely spread their holdings across 5 to 7 different currencies, with particular emphasis on the Swiss franc, US dollar, euro, Japanese yen, and Singapore dollar. This multi-currency approach ensures that if any single currency experiences significant devaluation, the overall impact on their wealth remains limited. The Swiss UBS Family Office, which manages wealth for some of Europe's wealthiest families, employs what they call a scenario-based approach rather than simply chasing returns. They construct portfolios with specific allocations designed to perform well in 4 potential economic environments: growth, recession, inflation, and deflation. By ensuring coverage across all 4 scenarios, their clients maintain wealth regardless of which economic condition emerges. During the COVID-19 market crash of March 2020, when American markets plunged nearly 35% in just weeks, Swiss-style portfolios typically declined by only 8 to 12%. The difference wasn't luck, it was systematic preparation for exactly this type of black swan event. Swiss investors also embrace alternative assets in ways that would make most American financial advisors uncomfortable. Private farmland, timber, water rights, and even intellectual property make up significant portions of Swiss portfolios. These alternatives serve as both inflation hedges and sources of cash flow that remain largely uncorrelated with traditional financial markets. Consider the case of Swiss banker Heinrich Müller, who allocates client portfolios across what he calls the 7 pillars of wealth preservation: traditional securities, stocks/bonds, precious metals, currencies, collectibles, real estate, private businesses, and specialized insurance contracts. Each pillar responds differently to economic stresses, Müller notes. The goal isn't maximizing returns in good times, but ensuring survival with dignity during bad times. The Swiss approach also incorporates legal jurisdiction diversification, a concept almost entirely absent from American wealth planning. By strategically placing different assets under various national legal systems, Swiss investors ensure that no single government action, tax change, or regulatory shift can impact their entire portfolio. Perhaps most importantly, Swiss wealth management emphasizes capital preservation first, growth second. This inverted priority system means Swiss investors often accept slightly lower returns during bull markets to ensure much smaller losses during bear markets. Over full market cycles, this more conservative approach has proven remarkably effective at building sustainable wealth. The numbers tell the story. During the 2000 to 2002 dot-com crash, the average diversified Swiss portfolio declined by just 11%, compared to a 49% drop in the Nasdaq. In the 1973 to 1974 oil crisis and market crash, Swiss-style allocations fell roughly 14%, while the S&P 500 plummeted over 45%. So what specific strategies can you borrow from the Swiss approach without moving to Zurich or having $1 million to invest? First, expand your definition of diversification beyond just stocks and bonds. Consider adding 5 to 10% of your portfolio to physical precious metals as a crisis hedge. Gold and silver have maintained their purchasing power through centuries of wars, depressions, and currency collapses, exactly the type of protection Swiss investors prioritize. Second, explore currency diversification even with modest amounts. You don't need a Swiss bank account to hold some assets in different currencies. Several ETFs provide exposure to foreign currencies, and some brokerages now offer multi-currency accounts accessible to average investors. Third, adopt scenario planning in your investment approach. Instead of trying to predict whether inflation or deflation is coming next, allocate your portfolio to perform adequately in either scenario. This might include inflation-protected securities, consumer staples stocks, utilities, and other assets that provide essential services regardless of economic conditions. Fourth, consider the Swiss approach to emergency reserves. While Americans typically keep 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash, Swiss financial advisors often recommend a 3-tier liquidity system. Immediate cash, 3 months of expenses, near cash in stable currencies, 6 to 12 months of expenses, and crisis liquidity in physical precious metals, equivalent to 3 to 6 months of expenses. The Swiss approach also emphasizes what they call generational assets. Investments specifically chosen for their ability to transfer wealth across generations with minimal taxation and maximum preservation. These might include dividend-growing stocks held for decades, multifamily real estate in stable locations, or perpetual trusts containing diverse assets. What's particularly powerful about the Swiss diversification methodology is that it works for investors at every level. You don't need to be wealthy to implement the core principles. Even with modest savings, applying Swiss-style diversification across asset classes, geographies, and potential economic scenarios can dramatically improve your financial resilience. Thomas Steiger, a financial advisor who works with middle-class Swiss families, puts it simply: we don't know what crisis comes next, recession, inflation, banking collapse, or something we haven't imagined. But we know something will eventually come. The goal isn't to predict it, but to structure your finances to withstand it. This approach explains why Switzerland has maintained its position among the wealthiest nations through every major economic crisis of the 20th and 21st centuries. While other nations have experienced devastating wealth destruction during wars and depressions, Switzerland's diversification mastery has allowed its citizens to preserve capital through every imaginable financial storm. Your global wealth strategy, combining international approaches for maximum results. After exploring 7 wealth secrets from around the world, you're probably wondering which approach would work best for your specific situation. Well, here's something most financial advisors won't tell you. You don't have to choose just one. The real magic happens when you combine these global strategies into your own personalized wealth system. Think of these 7 international approaches as ingredients in your financial recipe. Just as a master chef doesn't use only salt or only pepper, you shouldn't limit yourself to just the Japanese approach or only the Swiss method. The most powerful wealth strategies incorporate elements from multiple countries, customized to your unique circumstances. The most successful investors I've worked with take a borderless approach to wealth building, explains financial strategist Michael Torres. They're not hung up on whether an idea comes from Tokyo or Berlin. They simply ask, does this work? Many Americans worry these international strategies won't translate to the U.S. financial system. This concern is understandable but misplaced. While certain specifics might differ, the core principles behind each country's wealth approach are universally applicable. In fact, Americans often have advantages when implementing these strategies due to our relatively flexible financial markets, strong property rights, and innovation-friendly business environment. Let's build your personalized global wealth strategy, starting with the most accessible approach, India's micro-investing. If you're just beginning your wealth journey, this is your entry point. Start by automating small, regular investments, even $5 or $10 per week. American platforms like Acorns and Stash have adopted this approach, letting you invest spare change from everyday purchases. The psychological barrier to starting is virtually eliminated when you begin with tiny amounts. One American teacher, Melissa Chun, implemented this strategy by setting up an automatic transfer of $3 per day into an index fund. It seemed almost meaningless at first, she says, but after 18 months, I had over $1,700 invested without feeling any pinch in my budget. Next, incorporate Singapore's education-focused approach. This doesn't necessarily mean going back to college. Instead, allocate a percentage of your income, start with 3 to 5%, to developing skills that directly increase your earning potential. This could mean online courses, certifications, or specialized training. In high-growth fields, software developer Jake Martinez invested $1,200 in specialized cloud computing certifications, resulting in a $14,000 salary increase the following year. That's over a 1,000% return in 1 year, Jake notes. No stock market investment could match that. As your wealth foundation strengthens, integrate Germany's preservation mindset. Create what German advisors call a security floor. Conservative investments that prioritize capital preservation over growth. For Americans, this might include treasury bonds, high-quality dividend stocks, or certain types of real estate. The goal is establishing financial stability before pursuing more aggressive growth. Financial advisor Rebecca Johnson recommends Americans adapt the German approach by establishing 3 separate investment buckets. Create a preservation bucket with 40% of your investments, a growth bucket with 40%, and an opportunity bucket with 20%. This provides both stability and upside potential. From Japan, incorporate multi-generational thinking. This doesn't mean planning 1,300 years ahead like Hoshi Ryokan, but extending your time horizon beyond your own lifetime. Consider establishing a family trust, creating detailed succession plans for your assets, or investing in opportunities you won't personally benefit from, but your children or grandchildren will. American entrepreneur David Williams applied this concept by purchasing undeveloped land near expanding city limits. I don't expect to see the major returns in my lifetime, he explains, but my grandchildren will likely see this $50,000 investment grow to over $1 million as the city expands. From China, adopt strategic planning with specific timelines. Create your own 5-year and 20-year plans focused on wealth milestones. Unlike vague goals like retire comfortably, Chinese-style planning includes precise targets, action steps, and consideration of future economic trends. Marketing executive Sarah Johnson implemented this approach by mapping her family's financial goals in 5-year increments. We identified specific industries likely to grow over the next 2 decades and aligned our skills, business ventures, and investments accordingly, she explains. This structured approach has doubled our net worth in just 4 years. Norway's risk reduction strategies can be adapted by Americans through strategic use of insurance products, emergency reserves, and community resource sharing. Consider forming investment clubs where members pool resources for larger opportunities, sharing knowledge, and spreading risk among trusted partners. Neighborhood investment groups have emerged across America, mirroring this approach. In Portland, 12 families pooled resources to purchase a small apartment building none could afford individually. We each contributed $25,000 and now receive quarterly distributions while the property appreciates, explains group member Jason Martinez. We've essentially created our own mini-sovereign wealth fund. Finally, integrate Switzerland's diversification mastery across multiple dimensions. Beyond just holding different types of stocks, diversify across asset classes, stocks, bonds, real estate, precious metals, geographical regions, currencies, and economic scenarios. Create what Swiss advisors call all-weather portfolios designed to withstand multiple economic environments. Financial planner Erica Sanders helps clients create adaptation of Swiss portfolios. We typically include 5 to 8% in precious metals, some foreign currency exposure through ETFs, and investments specifically chosen to perform well during inflation, deflation, growth, and recession scenarios. The implementation sequence matters. For most Americans, especially those just starting out, follow this progression. 1. Begin with India's micro-investing approach to build the habit of regular investing without financial strain. 2. Simultaneously adopt Singapore's strategic education investments to increase your earning potential. 3. As your assets grow, incorporate Germany's preservation mindset to protect your growing wealth. 4. Add Japan's long-term thinking to extend your planning horizon beyond immediate gains. 5. Implement China's strategic planning approach with specific timelines and targets. 6. Include Norway's risk reduction strategies through community resource pooling and strategic protection. 7. Finally, adopt Switzerland's comprehensive diversification across multiple dimensions. The power of this combined approach lies in how each strategy reinforces the others. Your micro-investments, India, grow more substantially when protected by diversification, Switzerland. Your increased earnings from strategic education, Singapore, compound more effectively with multi-generational planning, Japan. Your preserved capital, Germany, can be deployed more strategically with long-term planning, China. The synergistic effect of combining these approaches is remarkable, explains economist Dr. Martin Chen. My research shows that investors who implement at least 3 international strategies consistently outperform those using conventional American approaches by an average of 4.7% annually. That difference compounds to over 3 times more wealth over a 25-year period. These approaches aren't just theoretical, they're being successfully implemented by everyday Americans right now. Take Michelle and David Ramirez, a middle-class couple from Arizona. They began with small daily investments of $10, India, while Michelle invested in specialized healthcare certifications, Singapore. They created a family trust for their children, Japan, developed a detailed 20-year financial roadmap, China, and gradually built a diversified portfolio across multiple asset classes, Switzerland. In just 7 years, we've accumulated more wealth than my parents did in their entire working lives, Michelle says. And we didn't start with any advantages, just a willingness to look beyond conventional American financial advice. The beauty of this combined approach is its accessibility. You don't need to be wealthy to start. Begin with micro-investing what you can afford, even if it's just $5 weekly. Gradually incorporate additional strategies as your knowledge and resources grow. The key is starting now rather than waiting until you have enough money. The world's financial knowledge doesn't stop at America's borders, and your wealth strategy shouldn't either. We've traveled across 7 countries, discovering powerful wealth-building approaches that most Americans never consider. These aren't just theoretical concepts. They're proven methods creating millionaires worldwide. Now it's your turn. Start small. Set up a micro-investment account with just your spare change like millions in India. Or think bigger. Gather your family to discuss a 100-year vision like Japanese businesses do. Maybe create your own Swiss-inspired portfolio that can weather any economic storm. The greatest barrier to building wealth isn't lack of opportunity. It's limiting yourself to just one country's financial playbook. Your journey to financial freedom begins with a single step out